I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. It's been a while since I've seen you. So, and my communication director, Efna Nahela, is on. Efna, how are we doing? Are we ready to start, or
live right now?
Are we live now? Okay. Excellent. Good afternoon. This is State Senator Jamie Eldridge, and welcome to another edition of Uplifting Voices, where I have a chance to interview Black leaders from across Massachusetts, and really have a special guest today, Segun Idowu, who is the President and CEO of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, otherwise known as BECMA. And I've known Segun for several years, and really happy to see him in this position. Segun, you've been the president since 2018. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's been a very, very long couple of years, but we've gotten a lot done. So it's been an exciting adventure.
Yeah, it's been a lot of turmoil in the past 5 years for you to get through. So. Yeah. What is the mission of BECMA, and if you could tell me a little bit about the history of BECMA, which I know until recently was sort of more Boston based.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it's really great to see you, and I'm looking forward to when we're all vaccinated up and get to hang out in person again. But I appreciate this opportunity to just have this chat with you, and also to engage those that live in your district. But in terms of BECMA, I've been proud to be here since late 2018. In terms of what the organization is, what we do, how we started, there's a report called The Color of Wealth in Boston. And many people may not have read it, but we all are familiar with at least one of the statistics that was in that report, which detailed the median net worth of Black and white families. And so I think we all know $247,500 is the median net worth for white families in Greater Boston, and $8 was the median net worth for Black families. That's what this particular report found. And so, of course, this upset many people. And so one of the things that happened was that there was this huge meeting in Dorchester, actually at the Prince Hall in Dorchester, where about 700 people came out, all from the surrounding community, to talk about how do we address this issue. And one of the things that came out of that conversation and subsequent meetings was BECMA, because the founders believed then, and they believe today, that one way to eliminate the racial wealth gap is by supporting Black-owned businesses, because Black businesses locate in our communities, they hire people in our communities, and they give back to our communities. So BECMA was founded to sort of operate as a chamber of commerce for Black businesses across the Commonwealth. And that was late 2015. And so I was fortunate to be called upon by the board in November of 2018, 3 years later, to join the club. And it's been a roller coaster ever since. But we've done a lot of great stuff, and I'm excited to be able to share that with you. But it's been a long ride here, but important work that we're doing. So.
Absolutely, and I'm actually very familiar with that report, because at the time I was co-chairing an asset development commission about what are the assets of people across the state, and that report done by the Federal Reserve of Boston came out around that time, and it was just shocking. I mean, I knew there would be disparities, but again, that $8 statistic for the average Black family in Boston was really shocking, and I think it did it led to a lot of efforts to try to combat that, and yet unfortunately not much has changed, and arguably from the pandemic, I think perhaps things have probably gotten worse. Is that your sense?
Yeah, I mean, especially as we're thinking about the status of Black businesses, we were already in a precarious position before the pandemic hit us, but we were on an upward trajectory. So when you think about even the state of Black businesses, recent data, 2018 annual survey of businesses via the U.S. Census showed us that there are at least over 2,000 Black firms here in Massachusetts, and that means that they employ more than two people full time. And these firms generate a revenue of $1.9 billion. They employ 17,000 residents of the Commonwealth, and they're paying out payroll of more than $500 million. And these are livable wages with benefits that help to keep families and communities safe and healthy. So that was their status in 2018, and it was on an upward trajectory. There was a report that Mass Inc., the Boston Foundation, and the Coalition for an Equitable Economy put out just recently that focuses on entrepreneurs of color. And what it found was that since 1970, entrepreneurship has actually been on the decline here in Massachusetts, but that for minority businesses, for communities of color, in recent years, we've seen that number going right back up. But of course, when you talk to a lot of Black business owners, I've been on a number of different calls since the pandemic started. And one thing has been true for just about everyone. They were all saying, 2019 was our best year. 2020 was going to be the year that we took off, and then the pandemic caught all that to shreds. And so, we put out a report. We did a survey of our members back in March of 2020, right before the state shut down. And, we have over 400 members now. And at that time, 90% were experiencing a somewhat severe impact by COVID. 60% had cash reserves to last up to 90 days, if at all. 15% said they had no cash reserves to survive the pandemic. And almost 50% of them said they would have to lay off their staff to survive. And that was early March of 2020. This is before, again, we shut down and everyone had to close. So, this has really had a devastating impact on particularly Black businesses, but minority businesses overall. And, the disjointed availability of capital has really impacted our businesses, particularly some of the barriers that are in place for applying for that relief. And then the fact that, even recently this year here in Boston, today in Worcester, as we're talking about the state of procurement. Capital is important, but commerce is what helps to grow businesses. And because a lot of us weren't getting contracts before the pandemic, we're still in a tight spot today. So, but there are opportunities. I think that's the important thing about this moment, is that there are opportunities for us to go up and to make sure that we're making the proper investments.
Well, that is encouraging, and obviously I want to talk more about that. I know there's been a lot of national reports, books talking about that asset gap between white families and Black families, whether you're talking about home ownership to other forms of capital, is such a major barrier for any entrepreneur, but especially for Black entrepreneurs, because more often than not, an entrepreneur is getting money from his or her parents, or from taking a second mortgage, or selling a house or other capital, and yet often that's just not a reality for a lot of Black residents or Black entrepreneurs, right?
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right. When you're thinking about how folks start a business, they usually go to their friends and family. And when you're talking about a net worth of $8, that's not a whole lot to scrape together to start a business. And so two things I'll note there. McKinsey and Company put out a report, I want to say, I think it was late last year, where they began to put out more data around Black businesses specifically. And one of the things they found was that on average, white entrepreneurs had access to about $137,000 in capital. And for Black entrepreneurs, it was significantly less than that, I'll just say. And so, that access to capital is important. And actually, I will say at BECMA, we don't really talk about access to capital. We know that Black and other people of color know how to access it. We know where the money is.
Yeah.
The issue is the dispersal of capital. It's the fact that our entrepreneurs are not trusted enough for those with the capital to give it to them. So the example I'll use is right now, this is my office, as all of you can see. I don't have I'm unfortunately not able to be home today in that comfort, but this is in a WeWork. And so often, I'll let folks know you will not find the Black Adam Newman. A Black person cannot walk into a room and walk out with a check for $10 million with an ill-informed idea. And yet all the studies out there show that it is actually venture capital firms that invest in BIPOC businesses, they overperform when compared to their to firms that invest solely in white firms. So anyway, I say all that to say that this capital piece is really critical. When I mentioned earlier that the coalition's report showed entrepreneurship is on the rise in communities of color, what I left out is that these businesses, these entrepreneurs are starting off from a much lower place than others, and that's tied to that McKinsey stat. And so even though entrepreneurship is on the rise and we're starting more businesses, we're starting from a very low place, which means it takes much longer to get to a profitability trajectory. And lots of small businesses within the first 5 years have to shut down because they're not hitting profitability status. And so we need to make sure that we're loosening up these pockets of capital so that folks are starting off from a higher place, able to hire more people, pay better wages, invest more in their business, and contribute more to the broader economy. I mean, one thing we try to make clear at BECMA is that the development of some communities cannot coexist with the underdevelopment of others. If Black businesses fail, so do all the other businesses in the Commonwealth. And so if Governor Baker or whoever sits in that seat in the future wants to keep talking about how robust the economy is in Massachusetts, it will always and will continue to be contingent on the growth and the health of minority businesses, particularly as the demographics are shifting here in the state.
Absolutely. In talking about that delivery of capital and making sure those investments reach Black entrepreneurs. So, I have no doubt you have lots of thoughts on that, but yeah, how do we tackle that from different angles? What is the plan, if you will?
Well, it comes from all different sources, right? So when we think about the state, what we were proud of was that in working in coalition, we were able to compel the government last year, Governor Baker's administration, to prioritize women and minority-owned businesses for the grants that were available to help folks impacted by COVID. So in the first round of that $51 million that the administration made available through the Mass Growth Capital Corporation, 100% of that money went to women and minority-owned businesses. And that was really, really important because a lot of our businesses had no access to PPP, and very few cities and towns in Massachusetts made grants available at the local level. So that was, for a lot of people, those grants they got from the state was the first time they got any financial assistance during COVID. And so that was one piece. And we know that, I think the last report I saw was that 40% of the rest of the money, the governor announced $700 million more dollars. And I think about 40% of that has gone to minority businesses. So that's one way. Another on the state level is working with your office, Senator. We were proud that you and the Senate and Rep. Eligardo in the House introduced a bill to establish a public bank here in Massachusetts, which is like that. We see other examples around the country, but the way it's been written here in Massachusetts will ensure that minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, other disadvantaged businesses are getting needed access to capital without all of the barriers in place. This won't operate like a commercial bank. And so there'll be very different needs and collateral to getting access to that capital, which is really important. And then when it comes to the private sector, in terms of what the state could do, it's encouraging, or I would say really using the bully pulpit that folks have in government to compel the private sector to also follow the lead of state government. So when it comes to resources on the private side, it's creating these public-private partnerships for whatever funding is available, so that they're putting into a pot that's managed by government and business service organizations. But at the end of the day, I know we're talking about capital, but what is so important and critical is commerce. And government can also play a role in compelling the private sector to make more contract opportunities available to minority-owned businesses, which quite frankly, they've not been doing. And it's not just a problem in Boston. I know we spent the last year talking about how 0.4% of city contracts in Boston were awarded to Black businesses, but the private sector cannot claim that they're doing much better, and the state can't either. And so as the state has been making adjustments, the city of Boston under Mayor Janey is making adjustments. It's going to be critical that the private sector is doing the same, because again, capital is important to help our businesses survive COVID, to help them come to a stable place. But commerce is what helps a business go from employing 1 or 2 people to employing 20 or 50 in the next couple of years, because it's the stability of these contracts that allows a business to reinvest in themselves and grow their capacity and the services or goods that they provide.
And how I know that there are bills to looking to tackle that the contracting or procurement massive barriers. I mean, I was just shocked when the report came out about Boston, and we've seen Massachusetts state government as well. How is it that you're able to change that dynamic and actually reach out to and have successful contracts with minority owners or entrepreneurs?
Well, the first is, it's a couple of things, and I'll do my best not to take up all the time on this, because I could talk about the procurement stuff all day, because we are met so often with excuses from officials on this. So I'll note a couple of things. First is the understanding that we can no longer ever say, as a Commonwealth, as a city or town, that we cannot find Black or other minority-owned businesses. I think we need to throw that excuse out the door. These businesses are here, and they are able to be found if you are creating the right partnerships with groups like BECMA, with Amplify Latinx, LISC Boston. I can go right on down the list of all these business service organizations who have all these relationships, know who the businesses are, and are able to help prepare them for opportunities. So I think the first part of this is about building partnerships with these organizations. I think secondly, it's about understanding what the barriers are currently. You mentioned that there's legislation right now. Senator Sonia Chang Diaz on the Senate side, and then Representative Russell Holmes on the House side introduced, it's the Bruce Bowling bill, which seeks to create equity in state contracting that works to, or at least introduces the notion of removing many barriers that are presently in place. So it's about supporting that bill. We have to take a look at Chapter 30B, because right now, at least on the state, Chapter 30B regulates municipal contracting. Right now that becomes the crutch that a lot of municipalities are leaning on to not award contracts to minority and women-owned businesses, because what it stipulates is that for contracts over $50,000, a contract has to go to the lowest bidder. And most of our businesses, we don't have the capacity and the profitability to offer the lowest bid, especially if you're talking about, if if it's a contract on printing, Staples can offer you something at 2 cents a sheet of paper, but a small business might have to sell it for 7 cents because that's what they can afford in order to not go broke. And so, we need to take a look at the laws we have in place that are preventing the state from achieving its stated goal of being an inclusive economy and achieving true equity. A lot of times the laws have always been used to prevent equity from coming about. And so we need to use this moment we're in to changing those laws to make it easier for us to achieve those goals. But, some other ways we can, accountability is really important. So ensuring that, at the same time that we're setting goals, we have to ensure that we're holding people accountable for reaching those goals. So on a city level, we have recommended to Boston and other municipalities that there not only be a department or an office specifically empowered with the ability to ensure supplier diversity is the ethos of that municipality, and that they have a compliance department that is robust and able to hold folks accountable, but that all of the leaders in a government organization are held accountable to reaching whatever the stated goals are. When it's somebody's job, like when your promotion or your raise or keeping your job at all is tied to reaching a goal, you are going to do everything you can to reach or exceed that goal. But right now, at least on a municipal level, it's really nobody's job to reach these goals, which is why you'll see in Boston, and we just read in GBH about Worcester today, people will say, well, we tried, so we'll try harder next time. That would be unacceptable if it were if you were being evaluated annually on whether or not you keep this job. So accountability is really important as well. But there are a number of recommendations that we have been making to different cities and towns, to the state. We were again proud that we were able to get the Baker administration to follow all of our recommendations last year. Chief among them was making the Supplier Diversity Office its own separate entity so that they have a bigger budget, they have more staff, they have a whole compliance unit. Before last year, they were a program within the Operational Services Division and it was they didn't have the resources needed to cover every contract at the state level, which is why you saw 1% of contracts going to minority businesses. But now, as a separate entity, if the proper investments are made through this budget, they'll have the ability to hold more people accountable and connect minority businesses to these opportunities. So lots more I could say there, but
You got a lot of content.
Yeah.
You mentioned WGBH in the report, and part of that was on the Red Sox and their contracting, talking about the private sector. What did that report say?
Yeah, so that it came out this morning, and I wish I could say, even for Boston, when their disparity study came out, we can't really ever say we're shocked, because as an organization, we hear the stories almost every day from our members about how they're getting blocked out of contracts, or they were on a contract and then got very little work. And so that latter example is what we saw just happen in Worcester, where Gilbane, this construction company, won a contract for $100 million to build the stadium in Worcester for the Red Sox. And they were touting when they won this contract that they were going to give make sure that women and minority-owned businesses got a major piece of that contract. And in fact, one of our members was touted. She was brought everywhere. She was on all the marketing material saying, "Look, this is an example of one of the minority women businesses that's going to get a lot of money out of this for doing quality work." And well, GBH followed up and said, it'd be great this contract is winding down this year. It'd be great to see what the numbers are. They got the numbers, and out of $100 million, according to GBH, less than 1%, which is this recurring theme throughout this state, less than 1% of that money went to a minority business. In fact, if the GBH numbers are accurate, only a little more than $100,000 was awarded to a minority business out of $100 million.
Yeah.
It's shameful. I don't even. I'm trying to find the right English word to explain it. I mean, at least in Boston, it was 9 million out of 2 billion, but at least it had an M after it. But 100,000 out of $100 million is it's shameful. And a state that has a robust number of minority businesses, particularly in the space for a contract like this, in construction, and all the things related to that, it just doesn't make any sense to us that that minority businesses were not used, and we just don't understand how this could be anything but intentional, right? You have to work hard not to employ a minority business for these types of contracts, because they're all around us. And the GBH story points out that Worcester officials say that well, same excuses we've heard in Boston. Well, we can't find anybody, or there weren't enough here in Worcester to do the work. But the report shows that only a small percentage of contracts went to Worcester-based businesses, and that actually a huge percentage of contracts were awarded to businesses in Eastern Mass, out of Boston. And so we have businesses, Black and brown businesses, that could have done a lot of that work. And so, it just really is just another example of how, when there's a lack of accountability, that's the kind of result that we get. But also it shows why there's so much cynicism in communities of color when it comes to this issue of contracting, because even when we do get awarded or are on a contract that has been awarded to a larger company, we still lose out on so much business. And it really, again, so I'm 32. And I'm only saying that because there are things I don't quite understand still, and won't for a long time. But one of the things I don't understand is, again, back to this idea that the development of some communities can't coexist with the underdevelopment of others. A healthy, thriving Black community, a healthy, thriving Latinx community, Indigenous community, Asian American community, only ensures that other communities are healthy and vibrant as well. But when other communities are depressed, that also impacts the health and vibrancy of even a community that might be considered doing well. And so it just has never made any sense to me why municipalities or folks in the private sector work so hard to block minority businesses and women-owned businesses out of participating, because it only serves them, right? It increases the tax base. So much more investment goes back into our community. So I've never quite understood that. And again, this project in Worcester, it's another missed opportunity. And when is there going to be another $100 million contract or something bigger, where the city has an opportunity to just make critical investments that transform the future of the city? It's a real shame, and not so much for the businesses that missed out, but for Worcester and the region itself on missing out on that opportunity.
It's really outrageous, and when you think about I know that part of that is old relationships that more often than not are with white contractors or developers or white-owned businesses. But I guess the thing I want to get your thoughts are is no doubt there's systemic racism. There's just outright racism, and I think there's finally a bit more of acknowledgement from white residents in Massachusetts that, wow, Massachusetts has a real issue and issues with race and systemic racism, that it's not something from the 1970s. But what are your thoughts on the impact of systemic racism and how do we combat that, which I think goes beyond contracting and procurement? I mean, it's really about our society.
Yeah. Well, again, we try to make the economic case for the impacts of systemic racism, and Citibank put out a report in October last year trying to quantify the impact of systemic racism on the nation. What they found is that since the year 2000, the nation has lost out on $16 trillion because of its love affair with systemic racism. And again, for a nation that prides itself, especially as a capitalist nation that prides itself on wanting to squeeze everything out of a penny and make sure that we are as successful as possible, the fact that we are losing out on so much capital because we want to hold on to this notion that one group of people is better than another, again, is mind-boggling. And so, the first step, as you've noted, is the fact that folks are finally acknowledging it. For a long time here in Massachusetts, we have prided ourselves on being the most progressive state in the union. We are Ted Kennedy's state. We're the state that fought on the right side of the Civil War. But we forget that in 1641, through the Body of Liberties, Massachusetts became the first colony to legalize slavery. Yeah. In the early 1800s, one of the first Jim Crow cars on a train appeared here in Massachusetts. 50 years later, it's the town of Brookline that creates the first racial covenant, barring the selling of homes to Black people, Irish people, and Indigenous people. And then you fast forward, we think about Boston and busing. We think about all these other reports showing the persistent inequality here. So, the first step is that acknowledgement, because, it honestly really still is kind of marrow deep, this idea that that it's not as bad here as it is in other places, even when all the statistics show us otherwise. So the first part is about acknowledging. The second part, I think, which we saw happening a little bit this past summer, after the lynching of George Floyd, is following Black and Brown leaders and voices. And, I have to give kudos to you, Senator, for hosting an event like this, which is about amplifying the voices of people of color, because that's exactly what Massachusetts was not doing for a long time. And so, the second piece of this is about following, listening to what Black and Brown people are saying, and then actually following through on what's being said and shared. I think that's how we begin to move our society closer to what Dr. King called the beloved community, where all of us share in the wealth and prosperity, and where we finally get to a place where we're not judging based on color, but rather content. We're not there yet, but the goal is to achieve that. And, I will say, for BECMA, we were fortunate to be able to start something called the Black Mass Coalition last summer, where we brought together about a dozen Black and Indigenous-led organizations to help put in one place all the things that Black and Brown people have been calling for a number of decades now. And we produced something called the Blueprint for a New World, which covers, we identify 5 different sectors: the private sector, nonprofits, philanthropic organizations, and then state and local government. And we came up with 5 different things that each of these sectors could do to begin to address systemic racism here in the Commonwealth. And again, circling back to what I mentioned earlier, the public bank was one of the tenets of our state government in that section of what should happen at the state level. And so again, we're grateful that you're taking the lead in pushing that at the state level. But we're looking forward to working with all of your colleagues to addressing all of the things in the state section, and then working with all of our colleagues in the other sectors to achieving those tenets as well, so that we can build on those efforts and achieve the society that you outlined earlier.
Absolutely, and that blueprint, is that on BECMA's website to take a look at?
Yes, so we invite people to visit our website. It's just www.becma.org/blackmass, which is Black MASS. And they'll find the blueprint there, the folks that are part of the coalition, and we'll have some exciting announcements this summer about some of the progress we've made on a lot of those a lot of those items. And so it's been,
Mhm.
again, it's been a great adventure. And, we've really appreciated the work of a lot of our partners
Mhm.
and colleagues in the private sector and otherwise to support our cause.
Well, that's great, and I'm just curious because I know for so long BECMA was focused just in Boston, and obviously you have Marty Walsh, now former Boston mayor, departing. I'm curious though, under his tenure with highlighting those very low procurement rates, was he taking measures? Were there changes in City Hall that were looking to address this before he left? Was there any change there? Or
Yeah, you're going to get me in trouble, Senator, because I got
forgive me.
opinions on
Forgive me.
I got opinions on this one too.
Yep.
Well, here's what I'll say.
Yep.
You know, certainly ever since the organization was founded, its goal was to work with elected officials and other folks in government to achieve our shared goal. I think at the end of the day, we all want to do better. And it's really just about how much courage one has and how much intentionality one has. So
Mhm.
under former Mayor Walsh, certainly there were efforts made to try to address the problem of equitable procurement. But it is the opinion of many on our board and many of our members, for sure, that those efforts never went far enough. And so that's why you have a disparity study that shows that over a 4-year period, 0.4% of contracts are awarded to Black businesses.
Mhm.
And a lot of that was because the mayor and really his team were telling him that, well, we have to wait for this report before we can do something meaningful and actionable. And it was always the position of BECMA that we don't need to wait. And in fact, if you do wait, that's the result that you'll have. So,
Sure.
you know, so yes, so there were efforts made. They did not go far enough. And it is, because of the results of that disparity study, it is what compelled BECMA and our partners at Amplify Latinx and the Greater Boston Latino Network, through the Lawyers for Civil Rights, to file a federal civil rights complaint against the city of Boston in February, because the report shows us, we believe very clearly, that there is a pattern of discrimination against minority businesses, particularly Black and Latinx businesses.
Mhm.
And so, it wasn't a broadside against the Walsh administration. This certainly has existed before he came along.
Mhm.
Under Menino, Menino got rid of the supplier diversity program in 2003 out of a fear that we would be sued for having a race conscious program. And,
Mhm.
the city of Boston was, it was still in single digits, but at least it was whole numbers in terms of doing business with minority businesses, but it cratered after that program was dismantled in 2003. And so this is something that former Mayor Walsh inherited. But again, it's a story of missed opportunities. What's true in Worcester is the same for Boston. But I will
Mhm.
say what we are encouraged by is that we have a new mayor. We have Mayor Kim Janey, who has been a steadfast supporter of BECMA ever since she was elected to the council. In fact,
Mhm.
it was Mayor Janey and Councilor Wu who held a hearing in 2019 that honestly is the reason why we're even talking about this. If they had not held that hearing in May 2019, where it was first revealed that in just 2018, 1% of contracts went to women and minority businesses, we wouldn't really be talking about this as much as we are now, or as pointedly as we are. And to give further credit, that conversation in 2019 was made possible by an ordinance that Councilor Wu and then Councilor Presley authored and worked with BECMA on. It was called Equity and City Contracts. And it's what called on Boston to create a supplier diversity program. But the most key part of that was that it called on the city to report quarterly on their spending with minority businesses. And when I came along in November and found that there were no reports to be found, it's what compelled that hearing in May and set us off to where we are today. So, we're looking forward to working with Mayor Janey on this, because she's shown that this is an issue that she cares about. She has a track record of working on this issue, and so we're looking forward to getting a lot of work done over the summer with her administration.
That's incredibly helpful to go back to that history and where things are at now. And as I think I mentioned at the beginning, I represent a Metro West district, suburban district, overwhelmingly white, though definitely increasing in diversity in many of the 14 communities I represent. You mentioned about the incredible, the increased focus since last summer with the murder of George Floyd. This week we're, so many of us are focused on the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin, is that, there's continued activity and discussion, racial justice groups in almost every one of the communities I represent. And, certainly I know that, one of the pieces as far as supporting, Black owned businesses is, is there a list of Black owned businesses, encouraging residents to spend their money at Black owned businesses. But what would you most like to see, white residents or suburban residents, or those that are, perhaps not in a community that's not particularly diverse? What would you want, them to focus on? Is it policy changes? Is it focused on supporting Black owned businesses? What in your opinion is most helpful? And I'm glad to hear that BECMA is looking to expand and have chapters throughout Massachusetts, which is terrific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the answer to your question is yes. So on BECMA's website, we certainly have, we've launched a partnership with a group called Black Owned Boston, which has a running list of Black owned businesses. It started off as Boston, but it's statewide. So we encourage folks to visit that list if they want to support our businesses individually. But, a lot of folks that live outside of Boston and in the western part of the state work in corporations, they work in other businesses, and so or they run them. And so it's also about what your company is doing in terms of its procurement dollars, in terms of what it's investing in terms of the hiring at your company. All of these things are important. And so, yes, the individual spending is encouraged and needed particularly for our consumer facing businesses. But for our businesses that are B2B, that are business to business, they need support too. And so it's also, asking, if you work in a company, asking what their spend is, and encouraging them to do business with more diverse suppliers. And then, yes, it is supporting us on the policy changes, because policy outlives all of us. The disparities that we see today are the result of a policy or policies that were instituted long before we were born. And so, these policies reverberate throughout history. And so it's going to be important that folks are supporting BECMA and other organizations that are pushing for policy that not only eliminate those policies, but that set our communities up for success. And to your latter point, yes, one of the things that we're really excited about is that later on this year, we'll be launching a chapter-based system. The goal is to have one chapter per congressional district, and these will start off as virtual in nature. So will give us an opportunity to ensure that all of the communities in these districts are represented, that folks have a seat at the table, that their voices are heard. But the goal is to ensure that we are truly fulfilling our mission to serve Black businesses across the Commonwealth. You mentioned earlier that we're largely been operating in Boston. And besides the fact that I like the name BECMA versus BECBOS, it's going to be important that we are hearing out from businesses that are in different parts of the state, because businesses in Worcester have very different issues and challenges they're facing when compared to businesses in Brockton, which have different issues than those in Springfield, which have different issues than those in Boston. And so when we are advocating as an organization on behalf of Black businesses, it's going to be important that all of those voices are informing that advocacy, so that we don't have any blind spots, and that when we're advocating for resources, that we're ensuring the equitable distribution of those resources rather than all of it going to just one region of the state. And these chapters also give an opportunity for our members to become local leaders, and to ensure that we're equipping them with the tools and resources necessary to empower them to advocate effectively for themselves. I mean, as an organization, of course, we are advocating and sitting at these tables and standing in these rooms on their behalf, but at these town meetings, at committee hearings, et cetera, at local Chamber of Commerce meetings, we want to ensure that our members feel adequately prepared and have the necessary tools to advocate for policies and practices on the local level as well. So we're really excited about that, and we'll be looking forward to sharing more information with your office and your district once available.
That's great. No, would love to see a district a chapter in Metro West, and what you said is so powerful about people, whether they own a business or work for a company or have some element of economic power, is to to take action. Because I think of it's a small example, but it was very powerful to me. Is that there was a spa in the town of Sudbury, which I represent. They were having their grand opening. And so, I went to the event, and their caterer, it was a Black-owned business out of Boston. And, I have no doubt that was an intentional act, of the owners, that, to have a contract with a caterer, from Boston that was Black-owned. That was a very rare sight when I go to, grand openings in my district. But that was an act that the owner did, and just think if more companies or more people that had a position in a company, were thinking about that, it would be tremendous positive economic impact for Black entrepreneurs and Black businesses.
Absolutely, and it's the impact is a lot greater than just the check that the business gets after that specific instance. Part of the report that our coalition put out, the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, earlier this month, one of the things it talks about is that, or at least part of the three-pronged approach on top of capital and commerce, is relationship building. That's really where all of this starts from. It's building these relationships. So that's why companies can say, well, I can't find them. Well, the reason they can't find them is because they don't have those relationships. And so that instance, that the person that hired that caterer helped to expose them to a whole new group of people who then say, I want to use them for my event, or tell my friend about them that owns a larger company. So that's really important, and I'm glad they did that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sort of on a similar note, this is something I've really been pressing. You talked about nonprofits, government agencies or town or city halls, is when positions do become available, doing the outreach, to diverse communities, and increasing the diversity of a town or city hall or school or major nonprofits. And I know that one of the questions I get from some of the town managers in my district or select board members is, and maybe this, I don't know if this is exactly under BECMA's vision or mission, is where should those, city and town governments be looking to make sure that they're doing outreach to hire a more diverse workforce? Is that something that the Mass Municipal Association is engaged in, or where do you see a solution to that?
Well, I know that, so for BECMA, we have our job board where we post the various jobs that are out there, and folks on our newsletter list are able to see them. And, we have about 10,000 folks on that list now. And it's a very diverse group of folks on that list. And so that's one way. We're partners with a number of different organizations that also have very broad and deep networks in communities of color. So I think those are different ways to ensure that information is getting out there. Again, it's just these partnerships with these nonprofits and other organizations that are serving these communities. They know the people, and they'll be the ones that are able to carry that information to them.
Absolutely. And I guess related around, networking is, chambers of commerce, which, sometimes can be fairly exclusive organizations. I'm thinking of, not the greatness or the greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, but, these smaller chambers of commerce that are across Massachusetts, that quite honestly are a very powerful network for businesses in a region or across a couple of communities. Is there outreach yet to those chambers about, improving their practices for networking and making sure that they're more diverse?
Yeah, I was actually very excited. So this is in 2019, as BECMA was kind of getting more out there, where there were a lot of chamber leaders, particularly outside of the Boston area, that were proactive and reached out to us in order to begin not only understanding what the organization did, but wanting to get in touch with our members and see if there was any overlap, if some of our folks lived in their areas, and how we could set up programming that connected them to local chamber members. And so there is or has been outreach, and I know that later this year, we'll be reaching out to try to. I'm getting ahead of one of my staff members, but I think we'll be all right. But we are looking to have a sort of a summit of local chamber leaders from across the state to talk exactly about this issue of increasing their membership and the diversity of their membership, but also finding ways for our organizations to work together and connect our folks and create those relationships, which is what's really sorely lacking here in the Commonwealth.
Well, that's really great to hear. That's really great to hear. And you mentioned your staff. So I'm correct that BECMA is adding more staff, which is great to hear.
We are. We're adding. So, when I started at BECMA, I was the first full-time staff person and the first full-time executive director at that time. And so we had a successful fundraising year last year with a lot of great support from our community and corporate partners, and so because of that, I was able to bring on some folks to the team to help us out full time and to ensure that I don't fall over. And so one of our staff members, Jessica Pierre, who's our director of strategic communications, helped to ensure that this conversation happened. And we have two other full-time members, Christopher Sani, who's our executive assistant and helping to help our operations run smoothly, and Samuel Gebru, who's our director of policy and public affairs. And we have many folks working with us as consultants, and we have some part-time individuals, and we have a couple of interns, and they're from all over the state. And so that's what I'm really proud of as well, is that we're not a Boston team, we are a Massachusetts team. And so, if we're gonna say we represent Massachusetts as an organization, it's true on our staff level, and our board as well represents the fullness of our state as well. So we're proud about that as well. So anyway, yeah, and we're hiring for a couple more positions, and then we got to stop because we got to get to work and all that. But
that's great. Well, that's so great to hear that you're growing and you're just putting out lots of great ideas and policies. And I do hope that the legislature can take action on procurement, on contracting, as well as I appreciate you mentioning the public bank bill, which would establish a public bank in Massachusetts with a particular focus on equity and small businesses. So thank you for mentioning that. And I know we could talk forever, but I really appreciate your time, Segun. Thank you so much for coming on Uplifting Voices. It's a real honor to have you on, and it's great to see you. I hope to see you in person soon. And want to thank everyone for listening to another edition of Uplifting Voices with Segun Idowu. the president and CEO of the Boston Economic Council of Massachusetts. So Segun, thanks so much. It was great to see you. Okay.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Take care.